I've been using this monitor for the last few months now with my MacBook Pro, and I can confidently say this is the best bang for your buck monitor for a MacBook. It's called the LG Ultrafine Display Ergo 4K HDR10 Monitor 32UN880-B. Besides the terrible name, it's actually a really good monitor. So I wrote down some pros and cons, and I want to go over them real quick with you to let you know if this is a good buying decision for you. We're going to start with the pros. The first pro is its size. 32 inches might not sound that big, especially compared to like a 27 inch, but it is way bigger. I was coming from a 27 inch iMac, and this feels night and day. It's actually 40% more screen area than with a 27 inch monitor. What that means in day to day is that I feel comfortable using 3 programs side by side instead of just 2 on the 27 inch, and that's a pretty big deal. But it also means when you're using one program like a video editor or photo editor, you get a lot more tools on the screen and you can still see everything. It really makes a big difference. In fact, 32 inches is I think the biggest I would go before I would want the screen to start curving around me, because the edges actually are pretty far away. The second big pro is that it has USB Type-C with power delivery, which means if you have a laptop with USB Type-C, you can just plug it in, that'll send a display signal and it'll power your laptop. Now, it's only 60 watts, so I was worried it wasn't gonna be enough because I have the 16-inch M1 Max, and the power brick for that is 140 watts. But so far, I've plugged it in and I haven't had any power drain while it's plugged up to the monitor. The worst case scenario I had was I did a 12-hour render for these really long podcasts I've been working on. And after 12 hours of straight rendering, I let it render all night, it had lost 1% battery. So in theory, if you left it on for weeks or months, hitting the CPU and GPU fully, you could drain it, but realistically speaking, 60 watts is more than enough even for the M1 Max. So if you have an M1 Max or anything less than that, 60 watts is gonna be totally great. The third pro is that it has a 4K resolution with 140 ppi. I tend to leave it on macOS's default scaling, but if you had better eyes or if you wanted more screen real estate, you can shrink that down and really get the most out of your display. I just think I'd rather have everything be a little bit bigger so that I'm not squinting or really getting up into the monitor. I like to be able to sit back and do it. So default resolution works for me, but if you needed more screen real estate, you can bump that up and then get more stuff on your screen. The fourth pro is brightness, and this might sound weird because it's only 350 nits, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but I have a big window right here and I've never had any problems seeing the display. Part of that is it's a matte display, so it has an anti-reflective coating, which means reflections are kind of dispersed, unlike a glossy display. But the other part is that with a display that big, it feels a lot brighter than 350 nits. So if I have a white page taking up the whole display, if you have that on full brightness, it's gonna hurt your eyes. So I usually use in I'd say a well-lit room with one window, I usually use it at about half the display brightness. I crank it up to full sometimes when it was in the summer and the sun was really bright and it was coming through the window. But other than that, I basically leave it on half or a little bit lower. So display brightness is more than enough. It's also an IPS display, which means it has good color accuracy and really good viewing angles. You can view it off axis by quite a ways and it's still really good. I think it's at 178 degrees, which is great. And then it covers 95% of the DCI-P3 color space, which is good. It's not perfect, but it's good enough that unless you're like working for Hollywood or something, it's going to be more than enough to get your colors accurate, at least in my opinion. I think the colors look fantastic and I've had no problems with doing color accurate work, which I actually do on a regular basis. Another pro is the stand. I have never had a monitor with this good of a stand out of the box. I've bought VESA mounts before and they've been pretty good, but this is better than any of the VESA mounts that I've bought. It's super good, it moves really easy, you can tilt the display all different ways to show people what you're looking at or whatever, and it also goes up and down really easily. It's fantastic, and probably my favorite part is because it's a clamp stand where you can clamp to the desk, it doesn't take any room on your desk, which means for me, when I want to use my iPad and draw, I can move my keyboard up where the stand would be on a regular monitor, but there's no stand, so it doesn't take up room, and then I can just draw and do my thing on my iPad. It's seriously awesome. I think the stand is probably my favorite feature of this monitor, which is crazy because it's not even the monitor itself. But I would have paid, knowing now how nice the stand is, I would have paid $150 for this stand itself. I mean, it's that good, and it came for free with the monitor. And then the last pro is it has really nice on-screen controls. I don't use them hardly at all. I basically used them the first day out of the box, and I've messed with them a little bit, but then I just set it and I've totally forgotten about them. But if you do have to get into those on-screen menus, it's really easy. It has a little knob on the bottom and you flick it around. Super easy, no learning curve. And then the last pro, and this is probably the biggest one, is the price. When this came out new, it was $700 and that was released in 2020. And for $700, maybe at the time it was a good buy, but now $700 can get you more. But you can pick these things up on eBay. I got mine refurbished and it was around 300 or maybe 350. So basically half the price of new. And it's factory refurbished from LG, so it looks brand new out of the box. I've had no problems with it at all. But for $350, this is an insanely good monitor. I don't think you can find anything that competes on all these different specs at this price point, and I've looked a lot. And I'll say one other thing about the scaling. I was really nervous because you always hear about Mac OS scaling and how it doesn't really like 4K. That's why Macs use 1440 or they use 5K, but they don't really do the 4K at this screen size. And it's basically you want 110 PPI or 220 PPI, and 220 is the Retina scaling that we've all heard about for Macs. And I thought this was going to be a huge issue, and you'll see forums about it. But so far, I've had no issues with the scaling whatsoever. I wouldn't worry at all about getting a 4K monitor that's 32 inches. The resolution scaling is totally fine, and I think you're gonna have a great time. Now let's get to the cons. The worst con for me, and this might sound silly, but the worst con is that it's only 60 Hertz. Maybe some of you don't care about that, and then great, it's not a con. But for me, my MacBook, my 16-inch MacBook, that has the ProMotion display, which means it has a high refresh rate at 120 Hertz. And to me, it's very noticeable how smooth that moves. This monitor, it's 60 Hertz, it's half the refresh rate, so it's definitely less smooth. But if you don't care about that, then doesn't matter. I mean, I don't use this for gaming or anything, so it doesn't matter in the way of gaming, but even just the way the UI moves, 60 Hertz looks clunky to me, especially when I have my iPhone and my iPad, and those are both also 120 Hertz. Then this screen just looks slow. But anyway, maybe a minor complaint for you. Just thought it was something you should know. Another big con for me is the contrast ratio. It's an IPS screen, which means it has 1,000:1 contrast ratio, which is in line with basically every other IPS screen out there. The problem is, when you put it up against like an OLED or a mini LED screen, the blacks look bright. And you'll know if you've ever seen a IPS with its screen, the screen is on, but it's displaying a black image and it looks like bright, like gray or like bright black, which doesn't make sense to say, but that's what it looks like. It's pretty noticeable. And I think when you look at the screen, like especially in the screensaver where you have the MacBook with its mini LED screen and then the LG 32-inch, I think you can really see that contrast ratio difference. Is it a big deal? No, not really, but it does take away from the experience. Another thing, and this might not matter at all to you, but the speakers are terrible. They get plenty loud, actually really loud, so that's nice. But they sound so bad. They're super tinny and muffled, so I really wouldn't recommend using them. I use headphones basically all the time, and if you don't have headphones or if you don't want to use headphones, then I would not recommend using these speakers. I would get a pair of speakers, external speakers, and use those. Because the monitor speakers, they get the job done if you're just trying to listen to some sound, just some audio or whatever, but it sounds bad, and you will know. It sounds pretty bad. Another con is the HDR. It does come with the HDR certification, but because the peak brightness isn't very bright, when you flip it into HDR mode, it doesn't look that different. And I'll actually say the reason I don't use HDR mode is it doesn't get as dim in HDR mode. So even if you turn the brightness down to the minimum in HDR, it's probably at about half or 3/4 the brightness at standard when you're in your standard dynamic range. So I just don't use the HDR at all, and I wouldn't recommend it. It doesn't look very good. And my last con, and maybe this isn't a con, maybe I was just expecting too much, but it has 2 USBA ports on the back, and I thought maybe I can use those to plug in my external SSDs that I video edit off of sometimes. But after trying it out, it's about 10 times slower to use the monitor as a hub, where I plug in my external SSD into the monitor and then my laptop into the monitor, and then use the monitor to go between the two, it's 10 times slower. Now, if you're using a keyboard and a mouse, that doesn't matter at all. It's gonna be totally great. But if you're transferring large files, like for video editing or maybe even photo editing, that makes a pretty big difference. And I was a little bummed because I was hoping I could plug in just one cable to my laptop and then have that also go to my external solid state drives, but it's just not fast enough. So when I need to use my external solid state drives, I just plug those into my laptop too, and then I get the full speeds. Again, this isn't really a con, that's just something I was hoping would work, but it doesn't really. And that's everything. It might have sounded like I have a lot of cons, but I really don't. This monitor is seriously fantastic. I wasn't expecting it to be this good because it was only 300 or 350 bucks. If you have a MacBook or any laptop that supports USB Type-C display output and power delivery, I'd get it in a heartbeat. That one plug cable, so you can take your laptop on the go and then you slap it in and plug it in with one cable, and then you're charging your laptop and you have your external display. It is so nice. This is one of those monitors where you get a bunch of the features of the higher end monitors, but without having to pay the price tag because it's a bit older, but the features still hold up in my opinion. So this is 2 thumbs up for me. I would recommend you go out there and buy it. I should say I'm not affiliated with LG. I bought this with my own money. This is not sponsored in any way. These are just my thoughts. I love the monitor. All right, that's gonna do it for this video. Hope you guys have a good one. See ya.